So starting off with number 99, we have Cool Borders 4. Since I'm only doing a minute on each of these, I'm just going to rattle off some positives and negatives of each of these, and that'll indicate why they are on the list where they are. So for Cool Borders 4, I like the trick system, how easy it was to get into, the way preloading played into it. It allowed me to do all kinds of crazy combos. There's a ton of courses. They varied in design and visuals and stuff like that, so made it a little interesting to level through all those. The grind system was overly magnetic, which some people hate, but that's something I liked. Things I didn't like, the sound design, everything was a little thwacky and hollow and didn't really sound like you would expect it to sound. And then the weird half-pipe physics, which were, they made it a little weird coming out of the top of the pipes. Harder to pull off tricks in half-pipes than it should have been, and you fall a lot as a result. And number 98, we have Eternal Champions, which was a Sega Genesis game. Things I liked about this one, character selection and the varied fighting styles. There was quite a few characters, I'm not sure the exact total, but they all had different ranged attacks and weapons, and some didn't have any weapons, stuff like that. So depending who you picked, you were playing almost a different game for each of them. The violence was on par with something like Mortal Kombat at the time, which, not having Mortal Kombat, it was something that I liked. The cost, it was, for me personally, it was one of those games where you borrow it from somebody and then you just never end up giving it back, so it was free for me. One of the things I didn't like was my brother would always play as Xavier, who's the guy you see on screen with the staff. He's a very cheap, imbalanced character, which that's one of the other things I didn't like about it, is the imbalancing between some of the characters. Number 97, we have Ultimate Doom, which, if you don't know, it was a collection of Doom games, with the exception of Doom 2 for the PC. It was my only experience with Doom growing up. I've played other versions later on, but I actually still haven't played Doom 2 to date because it wasn't included in that collection. Things I liked about it, it was Doom, so it was one of the first-person shooters I'd played, and even today it's fun to go back and play through. Atmosphere, I mean, because it was Doom, so it's really dark and disturbing and gives you that sense of dread, rounding corners and things like that. And the main thing I liked was that it had the multiple campaigns, there were mods for it, like countless mods, skins, all kinds of different things you could do with it, so that it had almost limitless replayability. Things I didn't like, repetitiveness. I mean, all the campaigns are basically the same, and no jumping. I mean, I'd played other games that had jumping, but no first-person shooters at that point, and that was just something I didn't like. Number 96, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. As you can tell by the footage I picked for this one of the things that I liked about this one is it's more Desmond. One of the things I don't like about the Assassin's Creed games is how much they focus on the animus and things like that. So Desmond is always my favorite part, and he was featured a lot more in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Other things I liked were the Assassin's Guild and how much deeper they made the combat. It made it a lot more interesting to do the in-between parts in the game while you get into the story segments. Things I didn't like, it was more Ezio. I mean, if you're going to put me in the Animus, at least give me a new character. Don't just rehash the same one over again. And then the amount of archers, which is something I've always had an issue with this franchise, is you try to get a good parkour line going across the rooftops, and then an archer just knocks you off a wall. It's really annoying. So that was a holdover from the other ones that I still didn't like. Number 95, Dino Crisis. Things I liked about it, I mean, it was a survival horror game, and at the time that I got it, I hadn't really played that many. I think Resident Evil 2 was the only one I'd played before picking up this one. So it was more survival horror, which is something that I liked. Again, similar to Doom, the atmosphere. I mean, this one, it was different from Doom, but it gives you that classic survival horror atmosphere where you don't know what's around each corner, and then because you're locked in on the camera angles, adds tension from that angle. Things I didn't like, terrible dialogue. I mean, that's also something I kind of liked, but it turned it into sort of a B-movie atmosphere, which sort of diminished the effectiveness of some of the scares and stuff like that. And the graphics, I mean, they were kind of awful. Maybe not for the time, but by the time I had played it, they were. And here's an example of some terrible dialogue.
That's disgusting.
This guy's been eviscerated. Something tore his intestines straight out.
At number 94, we have Medal of Honor, the original for the PlayStation, not that new piece of crap. Things I liked about it, it was World War II in a video game, which at the time was relatively fresh. I mean, you'd seen it in side-scrollers and things like that before, but in terms of first-person shooters, it was one of the first ones to bring it to the mainstream. The music was one of the biggest things for me. Fantastic music. If it isn't Hans Zimmer, it sounds like it is. So, I mean, that's that high quality of music that even by today's standards, it holds up to something like Halo or any of those games. Things I didn't like, brightness. I mean, you can tell in these, I mean, there's snow on the ground, but sometimes it got so dark you could barely tell where you were going and where the game wanted you to head, like especially in the tree sections early on in the game. And the enemy AI, it's not fantastic, and sometimes it seems like you fire a shot and they can hear you from across the entire game world. Number 93, Ehrgeiz, God Bless the Ring, or just Ehrgeiz. This was a weird game. It was a fighting game spin-off of Final Fantasy VII, but the things that I liked about it particularly were it was a true 3D fighter. I'd played some 3D fighters before, but it was the first one that let you freely roam around the ring in a true 3D environment as opposed to being locked to a 2D plane and being able to strafe in and out of it. And then the character design. I mean, I hadn't really played Final Fantasy VII, but I appreciated the design of it, so it was nice to be able to interact with that in a way that didn't involve me having to sit through a however many hour-long JRPG. Things I didn't like, it was hyper-Japanese. There was a storyline in the game, but it was almost entirely incomprehensible because of the way it was presented. And then also there was a dungeon crawler that composed of basically half the game, and it was awful. Very, very repetitive. The monster design was boring, and then the levels themselves were just dirt brown all over the place. Not fun to play at all. Number 92, Roll Cage Stage 2. Things that I liked about this one were that it was fast-paced, twitchy racing. Like I'd mentioned, I enjoyed from Jet Moto 3 in the review I posted up yesterday. I like how the physics are far from realistic. It let you drive up on the walls and the ceilings. Added a lot of depth to the racing. This being the second iteration of Roll Cage, it's something I had seen before, but I still enjoyed it when this one came around. And speaking of the first one, the weapon system in this one was a lot deeper. It had always been split into offensive and defensive weapons, but the weapons were a lot nicer in the second one. They give you a little bit more variety with what you could do for taking people down instead of just being direct knockoffs of like a Mario Kart weapon system. Things I didn't like, the frame rate. Occasionally when a lot of explosions start going off and things like that, the frame rate takes a huge dive, which in a game like this where you're driving, according to the speedometer, almost 500 miles an hour, it's kind of crucial that you can see what's going on at any given second. So that was a big hit against it. Number 91, Siphon Filter. While I preferred the second one, the first one was my introduction to Gabe Logan, who has always been one of my favorite, at least favorite named video game characters. He's also, if you look at the way he runs and dive rolls and stuff like that, he just is an all-around spy badass. So Gabe Logan is a huge positive for that. For me, having played it shortly after playing the first Metal Gear Solid game, it felt like basically a more action-y version of that, which all I wanted at that point was more Metal Gear Solid, so that's what it was for me, even though, I mean, very heavy on the action. Things I didn't like, there's a couple levels in Siphon Filter that are very strict stealth, where if you get spotted once, you fail and you have to start all over again, so that's nothing almost anybody likes, so that was a big hit against it. And also the bosses, some of them were a little bit too easy, so they diminished that part of the game for it. And finally, number 90, Wolfenstein 3D. Things I liked about this one, it was the first-person shooter that I'd ever played, so having come to enjoy first-person shooters a lot more since then, understandably I enjoyed this one as well. Second thing that I really liked about it was Mein Leben. Every time a guard would scream that after shooting them, like it's randomly selected death noises, but every time they'd say Mein Leben, I was laughing to myself, literally out loud. And then I liked the length of it, which admittedly I didn't know it at the time, but I only had the shareware version of the game, so it was one episode, didn't actually get to fight Robo Hitler. He fought the dude with the big chain guns at the end, but I liked that you could just pick up and play it. And then that was also simultaneously the only thing I didn't like, which if I had a big, long gaming session and I'd sit down and play this, I get to the end and I'm like, damn it, I want more of this. And then there wasn't any, so come to find out later that I didn't actually have the whole experience. So that was my top 100 games that I have ever played, numbers 99 through 90. Stay tuned in the next few days for 89 through 80. I'm going to keep lumping them together like this so there's not huge gaps between releases on reviews, written or otherwise. I may do a written batch of them, or I may just keep releasing the videos like this, but I guess that remains to be seen. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching.